Belgium. February 1945. Snow fell sideways, thick, wet, relentless. Inside a half-buried M10 Wolverine, I wiped frost from the periscope with my sleeve. The glass fogged again before I could even breathe. Through the milky air, shadows moved, 9 tanks crawling out of the woods, one of them a panther. Their engines rumbled like muted thunder beneath the snow. The radio was dead. The engine was silent. And behind me lay the Elsenborn Bridge, the last escape route for 2,000 men who didn't yet know they were one decision away from dying. I whispered into the cold. If I wait, they die. My hand tightened on the firing lever. And in that frozen silence one invisible question rose. Why was I about to say no to my commander? 5 days earlier, in a bomb-gutted farmhouse near Liège, our breath fogged the cracked window panes while Captain Dean Mallory laid down the rule that fit neatly in a binder and not at all in Belgium. He spoke evenly, like a man reciting torque values. No one fires without confirmation from HQ, radio's unstable. One mistake and you'll hit your own. He was right on paper. He was right in rooms with roofs. The men around the table nodded because their hands were cold and their coffee colder, and assent warms faster than argument. I nodded too. I was raised to respect the wrench and the manual comes from somewhere higher than the man who holds it. They handed us mimeographed sheets, purple ink bleeding at the edges, observe, report, never engage without orders. The doctrine looked clean because it had no mud on it. It assumed radios talk, maps agree, and roads run where they ran last summer. It assumed snow is scenery. Out here the snow was a system. It took what you said and kept it. The SCR 508 in our hull sulked at 15 degrees and went plain dead below 10. The crystals on the handset looked like salt. Static came in long white curtains, the same color as the fields, and made every voice sound like it was drowning. When the wind swung east, you could watch the signal strength drain off the needle like blood from a cut. I logged what I could anyway. Range marks. Bearings. Wind. Temperature. I wrote them in a grease-stained notebook because numbers hold when orders don't. I noted a line of spruce felled in a direction no lumberman would pick. I watched lanterns blink on and off along the far tree line in sets of 3. I drew triangles where the road ought to be straight. Night after night the picture sharpened, German engineers working under blackout cloth, cutting trees, dragging pontoon panels by hand, one silent rectangle at a time toward the river. Each morning I reported it. Mallory listened with that stillness officers practice when they don't want to show their math. He would thumb the brim of his cap, glance at the map, and speak doctrine. Maintain position. Await confirmation. He wasn't cruel. He was calibrated. If he loosened the rule for me, he had to loosen it for every ice-tired man with a sight picture and a grievance, and that is how blue on blue happens. I understood. I have seen a socket used as a hammer. I have seen what follows. But I could also read the other system, the one made of road widths, axle load, and river current. The Elsenborn Bridge sat behind us like a pressure valve. 2,000 men were feeding back through it, trucks in low gear, boots slipping on planks glazed by the night. If a column of armor got around our flank and onto that west approach before sunrise, the valve shut and the boiler burst. That is not a metaphor when you hear engines over-rev in the cold. Maps lied. The January thaw had rearranged ditches into ponds and ponds into mirrors that swallowed wheels. Ways marked, improved, had become white labyrinths with drifts high as a glacis. The signposts were either gone or worse, turned. We watched a supply convoy take a left that was a right and vanish into a stand of birch like a ship into fog. Doctrine wanted lanes and timings. The weather wanted jokes. The platoon talked in the low grammar of hungry men. Eddie Cole, my G***ner, said it best, they make the rules. We just live by M. I told him rules are gears. They transmit torque if they mesh. If they don't, they grind. He asked me what I aimed to do when the teeth started slipping. I told him I would listen to the machine. At night I lay on the ammo rack and listened for the river. It was there, under ice, a dull, steady pressure like a pump behind a wall. If you've ever stood in a dairy barn after midnight, you know the sound, something faithful, something that will keep working until a valve sticks and the belt snaps. I pictured pontoons marching toward that sound. I pictured a panther finding a shallow and testing it with a nose like a hunting dog. I pictured the bridge behind us jammed with men whose names I had never heard, all of them trusting the arithmetic of other men. Command's reasons weren't foolish. They were built on last week's report of friendly armor probing north, on the map that said a cavalry troop was somewhere in our arc, on the certainty that misidentification K*LLS more surely than a bad plan. We had already hit our own once that month, artillery rounds walking 200 yards short into a tree line where a patrol was supposed to be. After they pulled the bodies, Mallory took off his gloves and held them by the fingers like a cracked fan. "We won't do that again," he said. He meant it. So I kept marking. I kept watching the Germans treat the forest like a lathe. The fog did not just have teeth, it had a direction. It moved from the enemy to the river every dawn, slow as a hand over a lens. In that gray, edges softened. A panther's turret went from a circle to a rumor. A half-track's nose became a snowbank. The doctrine said, "Observe." The fog said, "Choose." On the fifth night, two muffled sh*TS walked across the far bank like someone tapping a waterline. After the second, lanterns winked 3 at a time from a point I had not drawn before. That meant a guide rope stretched. That meant the far anchor was in. I put my pencil down and touched the cold steel of the breech, as if the G*N could feel my apology. When I tried the radio again, the handset squealed and died. The dial sat on a black 0. I could have stayed with the rule, keep position, preserve the P*N, wait for the chain to carry the load. But there are moments when a system declares its boundary. The doctrine belonged to the rear. Survival belonged to men knee-deep in mud, counting lamp blinks in a forest that was learning to think. I am not brave by design. I am exact. Machines have taught me that exactness is a form of mercy. On that farm in Kansas, when a combine threw a belt, my father would K*LL the engine, not because the manual said so, but because noise is lag and lag is failure. In the Wolverine, noise was orders that couldn't cross the river. Mercy was geometry. So I decided what to do the next time I saw the column move. I would choose the weak link in the chain and break it where the break would starve the rest. I would say no to the clean rule so the dirty road could stay open. And if I was wrong, the court would be warm and the paper would be dry. If I was right, the bridge would sing another day. Before the war, I fixed farm machines. Honest machines, everything visible, every failure explainable. Pistons, belts, bearings. No armor, no blood, no mystery. You could hear when something was wrong, a dry knock, a late spark, a tired hum. My father taught me, if it breaks once, find the reason, not the result. I carried that line like a wrench in my pocket. My name was Caleb Norris, farm mechanic from western Kansas. 3-room house, tin roof barn, 2 aging John Deeres. In summer, I worked the fields. In winter, I repaired everyone else's. Grease under my nails, diesel in my lungs. Every task had a number, fuel ratio, plow depth, angle of pull. I liked numbers, they didn't lie. My wife, Ruth, said I never looked up from them long enough to see the sky. She left notes in my lunch bag that said, "Remember to look up sometimes." I did. Only to check the weather. When the draft notice came, I didn't argue. War was just another system, I thought, loud, wasteful, but logical. Machines scaled up until they included people. They trained me for armor maintenance first, then G*Nary. I wasn't the best sh*T, but I was precise. I learned every screw of the M10 Wolverine before I ever learned to pronounce Bastogne. The others called it superstition, I called it prevention. Discipline suited me. Rules are like gears, they transmit force if they fit. But when they don't, they grind and everything stops. In those early months I believed orders were the oil that kept the world turning. I was wrong. Europe changed that. Mud swallowed half our machines, radios froze solid. I saw that command diagrams never matched the ground. Doctrine assumed dry maps, working batteries, steady hands. Out there, everything had static in it, air, water, men. Orders came too late, or not at all. You started relying on what you could measure, not what you were told. I was never brave. Just exact. When shells fell, I counted seconds between blasts, distance by echo. When I repaired a jammed breech, I timed my own pulse to keep steady. I believed that precision was a kind of faith, one that didn't need chaplains. My crew learned to leave me alone with the tank. I'd rest a palm on the armor, listening. Metal speaks, in heat, in vibration, in silence. If it trembles wrong, someone dies tomorrow. Eddie Cole, my G*Ner, used to joke, "He's talking to her again." Maybe I was. Machines don't lie to you unless you stop listening. The Wolverine itself was a contradiction, open-topped, under-armored, fast. Diesel twin engines, General Motors 6046, 12 cylinders paired like lungs. Beautiful if you treated them right, treacherous if you didn't. I learned its moods, how the right clutch stiffened in cold, how the turret bearings sang when they were due for grease. That knowledge was survival, not sentiment. Back home, repair was quiet work, you fixed, you tested, you trusted. Out here, fixing meant living through the next hour. When a track broke under fire, there was no time for manuals, you prayed to geometry. Angles and leverage replaced faith. I used to believe people were more complicated than engines. The war changed that too. Engines at least want to run. People want too many things at once. I saw men burn out like bearings, seeing too much friction between duty and fear. You can oil a machine. You can't oil a conscience. Sometimes, in the rare calm between bombardments, I'd imagine the farm. The smell of cut grass, the slow hum of a well pump. Ruth standing in the doorway, shading her eyes. For a moment, I'd believe in normal things, then the radio would crackle and the illusion would dissolve back into static. By February 1945, I no longer expected courage or glory, only failure points. I saw the front not as a line, but as a vast, broken mechanism held together by exhaustion and luck. One sheared pin, one bad decision, and it would all collapse. That morning by the Elsenborn Bridge, when the radio died and fog erased the horizon, I knew what was happening. I'd heard it 1,000 times before, the sound a machine makes right before it seizes. Command still believed in procedure, the snow didn't. And so when the moment came, when the column appeared out of the woods and I realized waiting meant watching men die, I didn't think about orders or punishment. I thought like a mechanic. The system was failing. And when a system fails, you don't consult the manual. You shut it off and save what you can. At first, I obeyed. Obedience is easy when you can disguise it as patience. I kept the logbook clean, targets observed, bearings, wind, temperature, fuel pressure, elevation drift. Every evening I sat under a blackout tarp, writing numbers by the dim glow of a hooded flashlight, listening to the forest breathe. The doctrine said, observe, report, await confirmation. So I did. I sent every message up the chain, every detail exact as a lathe cut. But the forest was changing faster than the reports could travel. 3 nights in a row I saw faint shapes at the far bank, men moving like engineers, not infantry. They cut trees, stripped the bark, stacked them in pairs, and dragged them toward the water. Once, I heard the soft metallic tap of hammer on pin. Pontoon work. Bridge work. The kind that doesn't stop once it starts. I reported it through the radio, voice calm, professional, enemy activity along the south bend, possible crossing preparation. The reply came after 5 minutes of static, maintain position. Await confirmation. Another day passed. More movement. More shadows. Another report. The same reply. By the 3rd night, it was obvious, they weren't scouting, they were building. A crossing meant armor. Armor meant speed. And speed, in this terrain, could only mean one target, the Elsenborn Bridge. It was the last route for retreating divisions, 2,000 men and 1,000 vehicles. Lose it, and the whole flank collapses. Still, command insisted on silence. Do not engage, the message said. Friendly units may be operating north of your position. Friendly units, phantoms drawn on a map now buried under snow. I looked at the coordinates they'd sent. They placed our supposed allies in the same valley where I just watched Germans clearing trees. Paper ghosts. Eddie Cole, my G***ner, sat beside me that night cleaning the breach with a rag darkened by soot. He was younger than me by 5 years, a kid from Michigan who could fix a radio with a knife blade. He said, they make the rules, we just live by them. I stared at the fog outside the hatch. Not if the rules K***LL us first. The words came out low, almost mechanical, but they stayed in the air longer than the smoke from his cigarette. He didn't answer. Neither of us had anything better than the rulebook, and it was written by men who weren't freezing in a steel box. The next morning, I climbed out to check the periscope. Snow had crusted over the glass, blinding us. I brushed it clean and saw tracks, wide, heavy, leading from the treeline toward the half-frozen river. I followed them on foot for 50 yards, boots crunching through the silence, until I reached the water. There it was, a narrow pontoon span, half-finished, glistening with frost. German helmets moved among the trees beyond, heads bent to their work. I counted 9. Maybe 10. The smell of fuel drifted faintly through the cold, diesel, not wood smoke. That meant vehicles were close. When I returned to the Wolverine, Cole looked up. HQ still wants us quiet? I nodded. They'll want confirmation from air recon. He spat into the snow. By the time recon flies, they'll be across. He was right. But being right wasn't in the manual either. That night, the river sang louder. The current had chewed through the ice, widening the black channel. I could almost hear the Germans' rhythm, hammer, pause, hammer. A kind of heartbeat. I tuned the radio again. Static. The dial glowed faintly, the signal needle limp against the stop. I hit the casing with my palm, nothing changed. Orders or not, information is useless when it arrives late. Machines have taught me that. You can't fix an overheating engine with instructions delivered after it burns. On the 5th morning, we found a dead crow frozen to the front glacis. Its wings outstretched, eyes iced white. The omen wasn't lost on anyone. Cole muttered a prayer under his breath. I just logged the temperature, -11 Celsius. Steel shrinks at that point, tolerances tighten. A jam could mean death. By noon, the fog thickened again. I wiped the periscope and caught movement, 3 trucks parked on the far bank, canvas covers drawn back. Men unloading crates. Ammunition. They were fortifying the crossing. The Germans weren't waiting for anyone's permission. I made one last transmission attempt, pressing the handset so hard the edge bit into my glove. Eagle 4 to command, bridge activity confirmed, repeat confirmed. Request clearance to engage. Static. Then a half-voice drowned in noise, maintain, position, wait, then silence. The rule said wait. Logic said act. I sat there, staring at the dead radio, feeling the pulse in my fingers align with the hammer rhythm across the river. For the first time since Kansas, I felt the machine of war slipping its gears. When night fell, we shut down the engine to save fuel. The Wolverine turned into an iron tomb, cold seeping through the floor plates. I couldn't sleep. I listened to the distant creak of metal and water, to the faint voices in German drifting over the river. They were laughing. Confident. Men who believed no one was watching. I thought of Ruth's last note, folded in my breast pocket, don't forget to look up. I did. Through the periscope, I looked up, and saw the faint glow of lanterns hanging in a row, reflections dancing on the ice. Not stars. Not hope. Measurements. Proof. That was when I knew, the rule I'd been following belonged to another world. The men who wrote it had never heard bridges being built in the dark. From that moment, every part of me began to prepare, not for orders, but for the sound that would tell me when to fire. By February 12th, the fog had grown teeth. It bit at the edges of vision, chewed sound into fragments, and turned the world into a room with no walls. From dawn till dusk the air stayed the same shade of gray, and the temperature slid between misery and paralysis. The Wolverine's diesel engines hadn't been started in 2 days, fuel was rationed and silence was worth more than mobility. That morning, I opened the periscope and saw nothing at first, only a shifting blur of snow. Then shapes began to move inside it, armor silhouettes, small at first, then larger. They came in deliberate intervals, 9 of them, single file, black crosses dulled by frost. The lead vehicle was unmistakable, a Panther. Its barrel glistened like a frozen limb. Behind it followed Panzer IVs and half-tracks, and somewhere among them, supply trucks heavy enough to crack the river ice if they tried to cross too soon. I closed the scope and exhaled through my nose. They're here, I said quietly. Cole leaned forward. Orders? None. We both knew what that meant. I switched on the radio again, scraping frost from the dial with my fingernail. The handset hissed, spat, died. I tapped the casing, turned the frequency knob in tiny, desperate arcs. Nothing. Command was deaf, blind, or gone. Cole stared at the snow-packed viewport. Maybe we pull back, warn them in person. Too far, I said. Bridge traffic's jammed solid. I'd checked earlier, trucks, medics, stragglers, all flowing west across Elsenborn like blood through a single artery. If that bridge was hit, it wouldn't just be men who died. It would be the idea that anyone back there could still win. The Germans were methodical. You could hear it in the intervals between their engines, 3 seconds of distance, enough not to collide, not enough to scatter. It was the rhythm of confidence. They thought the Americans ahead were retreating, that the roads were theirs again. Through the periscope I measured range, 600 meters to the tree line, 400 to the leading Panther. I drew quick figures on the margin of my notebook, angles, shell drop, the friction loss of a frozen barrel. My pencil left shallow grooves in the paper. Graphite had turned brittle in the cold. Cole whispered, "If we shoot without orders." "I know." Court-martial was a word shaped like a cage. It waited somewhere warm, in an office with working lights. Out here, the penalty was simpler. If I obeyed, we'd die quiet. If I disobeyed, we might live loud. I watched the panther pause at the edge of the woods. Its commander stood half out of the hatch, scanning with binoculars, unaware that a single man 300 yards away was calculating the distance between disobedience and logic. My hands were steady, but my mind divided itself into two machines, the soldier and the mechanic. The soldier recited regulation, the mechanic listened to the deeper system. And the system was failing. We had one chance. If the column reached the open slope leading to the bridge road, they'd see the convoys moving west. They'd shell the causeway, stall the retreat, crush it all under tonnage and timing. I thought of the engineers who built that bridge, men with blueprints and pencils, building straight lines in a crooked world. Somewhere in their design was a tolerance value, a number that said how much strain the structure could bear before it broke. Every machine has that number. Every army too. Cole adjusted the sight out of habit, though he hadn't been told to. He said, "They don't see what we see." "Not yet." He nodded, eyes reflecting the faint green of the scope light. "You thinking what I think?" "I'm thinking if I follow the book, we vanish." He smiled without humor. "Then what's left?" "Geometry." The word surprised him, but he understood. For me, geometry meant survival, the angles of armor, the curves of terrain, the arithmetic of destruction. The field wasn't chaos, it was a drawing, and the trick was to erase the right line. The Germans advanced another 50 meters. I could hear them now, low mechanical growls under the wind. The sound crawled through the hull, vibrating the bolts, resonating in my teeth. "Range?" I asked. 390, Cole said. "Elevation 2 degrees down, 1 left." He adjusted the wheel, movement slow, reverent. The Wolverine's G*N settled like a lung taking its final breath. I hesitated, not from fear, but from habit. Every rule I'd learned was screaming against this. Fire without confirmation, and you become the enemy you fear, the one who guesses wrong. But sometimes guessing right is the only SK*LL left. The fog thinned for a heartbeat, and the panther's flank appeared, broad, perfect, vulnerable. In that sliver of visibility, I saw everything: the ridge, the bridge beyond it, the endless column of trucks, the men who trusted an invisible command to save them. It struck me that none of them knew my name. None ever would. Cole waited. "Sir?" The word echoed inside the hull, weightless and final. I lowered my hand to the firing lever and stopped an inch short. I told myself, wait one more second. Maybe HQ will break through. Maybe the line will hum again. But the radio stayed dead, and the sound outside grew louder. The Panther's engine roared as it shifted into assault gear. That was the sound of inevitability. Cole said quietly, "If we don't, nobody will." I looked through the periscope one last time. The world beyond was white, blurred, exact. Every vehicle in that column was a calculation, every meter a margin of error. The soldier in me whispered, "Hold." The mechanic in me answered, "Fix the failure." And that was when the decision stopped being moral and became mechanical. I took a breath that felt like glass and said, "Load M61, armor-piercing." Cole froze, then reached for the shell. "That's disobedience." "That's geometry," I said again. He slid the round into the breech. The sound was clean, final. The Wolverine seemed to wake beneath us, steel tensing like muscle. Outside, the column began to move. 9 tanks, 1 bridge, 1 rule too many. Inside, my hand tightened on the lever, and the doctrine of an entire army hung in the balance of one man's breath. I hesitated once. The hesitation wasn't cowardice, it was the last courtesy I gave the rulebook. For 20 years a man like me listens to manuals the way others listen to prayers. You treat them with respect because sometimes they keep you alive. But out there, respect risked being an alibi. The Panther rolled forward another 5 meters, its profile still mostly hidden in the trees, but enough of its flank showed to be a target, a bright, vulnerable curve in a world gone dull. "Load M61, armor-piercing," I said, the words flat, precise. The round was heavy as a conscience and twice as cold. Eddie's hands moved with a practiced economy. He shelled the chamber like a man who'd loaded and unloaded the same truth for months. The Wolverine's breech closed with a metallic snap that sounded louder than a shout in that hollow hull. Cole's breath fogged the viewport. "You know what you're doing?" he asked, though he already had. Men who've seen too many charts learn to ask the question aloud even when they know the answer. It steadies the hand. It spreads culpability out over air. This is not about courage, I said. It's geometry. I set the elevation 2 degrees down and dialed a click left for the wind's kiss. I had watched snow drift falls for 3 nights. You learn how a gust changes a shell's mood. The firing solution in my head was not heroics. It was subtraction. Remove the link, and the chain collapses. We had practiced this in the dark of the maintenance bay, but never as a doctrine, never as permission. The book described fire control solutions in sterile diagrams. It did not speak of a man who had to choose between obedience and the arithmetic of lives. That gap became my margin of error. I aimed at the third vehicle in the line. Not the first, which would have screamed warning and given the rest time to scatter. Not the last, which would only have been revenge. The third was a seam, logistics and fuel and coordination. Strike it and the column would bind itself. It's the same logic a farmer uses: cut the head of the snake at the right vertebra and the rest curls in on itself. The lever bit into my palm. For a breath I heard only the long slow beat of the river and the faint clink of tools against steel in our own bowels. Then the Wolverine spit. The report was a white thunder that punched the air and bent the snow for an instant. The shell struck where I meant it, a dull blossom of heat and flame that belched up through the mist like a cursed flower. Everything after that happened in measures I'd practiced: shift 10 yards left, fire again, watch for counterfire, move, re-zero on burning shadows where the feed trucks had been. The first hit unclipped the column's choreography. Drivers slammed brakes, engines choked on cooling fires, and the Panther's crew scrambled for observation because the world around them had redefined itself as hostile. In that confusion their cohesion bled away. The Panther fired blindly once, a thunderclap that shook the trees. The round struck a stacked crate of barrels and sent a black flare into the snow. The fuel cooked off and the column's midsection became a furnace. The half-tracks tried to back up and found themselves facing burning hulks. Men spilled into the white like spilled grain. Some ran, some froze, some tried to wrench their vehicles into motion and failed because the machine had decided it would not cooperate. We changed position 3 times that morning. Each move was small, necessary. 10 yards here, 20 there, always with an eye to concealment and to the angles that turned the enemy's armor into targets. Our sh*TS were not random, they were arithmetic. Each fired moment subtracted a variable from the Germans' plan until the equation no longer balanced in their favor. When it was over, the road glowed in places and black smoke stitched the sky. The bridge behind us remained intact. Trucks rolled across in the afternoon, slow and cautious, flatbeds, ambulances, fuel wagons. Men with frozen faces waved at nothing and everything. The Elsenborn Bridge did not burn. Its planks stayed beneath weight. Inside the crew compartment, the silence that followed had a new quality. It was not the passive, obedient hush of men waiting for orders. It was the sort you hear after a verdict. Eddie's hands trembled as he unlatched a spent shell, and I felt my own fingers go numb for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. We had broken the law of command. The consequence sat warm somewhere ahead, perhaps in an office where rules mean more than lives. Later, when Captain Mallory asked for a report, I wrote what I had seen, where I had sh*T, and the effect it had produced. I did not write why, that was for courts. When he read the lines his face did not crack in anger. He folded the paper like someone folding a map with care, and said, "You disobeyed a direct order." He did not raise his voice. Procedure made that unnecessary. "Yes, sir," I answered. "And?" He was looking at me as if trying to weigh the currency of truth. "I saved a crossing." He tore the report in half and placed the pieces in his pocket as if they were too hot to hold. "Then this never happened," he said. It was a command that sounded like a pardon. It was relief and erasure at once. In the trenches of logic, they had decided to let the ledger lie. My name might be left out of the bulletin, but the bridge stayed. Men who had no knowledge of me continued to live because of a decision I had made alone, in a steel box, measured by angles and by mercy. When the smoke cleared and the patrols counted the cost, rumor did what it always does, it rewrote the mechanics into myth. They spoke of phantom batteries and invisible G***ners. The men who crossed the bridge later would pray for the phantom that had held the road. I kept my grease-stained notebook with the ranges and corrections inside a drawer. It was a plain fact in a world that preferred legends. At night, alone in my berth, I thought of Ruth's note, "Remember to look up sometimes." I lifted the small sheet of paper in my hand and let my eyes trace the letters, then the ceiling. I'd looked up that day, but not for the sky. I'd looked up to calculate arc and descent, to measure a gap between doctrine and survival. In the end, saying no to an order had been the most mechanical thing I could do, an adjustment to a failing system, and it had worked. The first sh*T tore the morning apart. It was not thunder, it was a correction. The M10 kicked like an angry animal, the recoil slamming through the hull and into my bones. I caught the periscope just as the explosion flared, a bloom of orange and black, snow lifting in a halo around the stricken panzer. The third tank in the German line was gone, and the chain behind it stuttered, confused by the sudden subtraction. "Reload," I said. Eddie Cole's hands moved faster than words, his breath a ghost in the dim light. The second shell went home, the breech locked with a metallic sigh. I shifted the Wolverine 3 yards left, barely enough to change our bearing, enough to make our muzzle flash vanish from its last ghost. Target, the 6th vehicle. Elevation 2 degrees down. Wind 0. Distance 380 meters. I fired again. The shell hit a half-track mid-column, ammunition transport, by the markings I could glimpse before impact. The blast folded it like paper, and the heat touched the snow with a cruel kind of light. The concussion rolled back through the fog and hit the Panther at the front, confusing its G**ners. For a heartbeat, the entire formation froze. Then panic began its work. The German infantry scattered, boots slipping on ice, rifles clattering against hulls. The Panther turret started to turn, slow and deliberate, searching for the unseen enemy. It didn't know it was already staring at one. "Switch to he," I said. Cole obeyed, his fingers black with soot and cold grease. The shell he loaded was white-capped, heavier. He slapped the side of the breech and shouted, "Up." I found the target, a fuel truck toward the rear, canvas half pulled back, glistening barrels inside. I waited for it to angle slightly, to reveal the seam where tank and truck met. Then I fired. For an instant, nothing, then everything. The explosion didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like the world inhaling too fast. A wave of black fire rolled down the road, fuel igniting in a serpentine rush, swallowing men, tires, timber. Flames leapt 20 feet high and curved over the wrecks like molten waves. The air itself burned, and through it came fragments of snow, paper, and metal spinning together in a storm of contradiction, winter and hell sharing the same breath. The Panther fired back, wild, blind, its shell streaking past us with a shriek that tore the sound from my ears. It detonated somewhere behind, showering the Wolverine in dirt and splinters. I ducked, heart steady. Cole grinned through the smoke. "They're guessing now." "They'll guess wrong," I said. We moved again, 15 yards downslope. I didn't need full cover, only confusion. Each time we fired, we shifted. Each time we shifted, the Germans recalculated and missed. They were fighting phantoms, not positions. sh*T4, Panzer IV, leading vehicle. It caught the shell just under the turret ring. The explosion was immediate, brutal, efficient. The turret lifted clean off like a man removing his hat. sh*T5, another half-track, this one trying to turn back toward the trees. The round found its rear axle, fire followed. sh*T6, blind sh*T through the fog, aimed by habit more than vision. I never saw the impact, but the shockwave that rolled through the air told me it had found something alive. By the 7th sh*T, the Germans were broken. Half their line burned, the rest backed into itself. The road was no longer a column, it was a trap of their own making. The Panther tried to reverse, gears grinding, but behind it was only wreckage and smoke. Cole looked through the sight, eyes wide. "We can finish them." "No," I said. "We finish the bridge." The distinction mattered. The purpose was never the enemy, it was what lay behind me, the 2,000 men crossing into safety while we turned doctrine into ruin. Another shell. Another correction. The Wolverine felt alive now, a living thing that breathed through its G***n. Every sh*T had rhythm, inhale, fire, exhale, move. Each recoil translated into heartbeat. The G**n barrel glowed faintly red, the air inside the turret sharp with cordite. After the 10th round, the firing stopped not because the fight was over but because there was nothing left worth shooting. Smoke drifted low over the snow. Shapes flickered inside it, men running, men crawling, men no longer moving at all. The fire ate the oxygen and left behind silence, heavy and absolute. I opened the hatch. The cold punched me in the lungs. The world smelled of iron and burned fuel. To the east, the sky was a dull, bruised gray. I could see the outlines of the wrecks, 12, maybe 13 vehicles in total, some still burning, others simply crushed under the weight of failure. Cole climbed up beside me, coughing. "You think they'll believe this?" "They'll believe what the bridge tells them," I said. Behind us, the rumble of trucks never stopped. Engines grumbled, chains clanked, boots hit wood. The convoy lived because we had decided to stop being part of the machinery that wanted to destroy it. As dusk fell, the fog thickened again, covering everything we had done. The fire dimmed, the air cooled, and soon the field looked almost peaceful, just smoldering snow, quiet and still. You could almost pretend nothing had happened. Inside the Wolverine, I logged the sh*TS one by one. Range, wind, target type, estimated result. I wrote without shaking, as though the war were still a problem I could solve by precision. At the bottom of the page, I added one last line in small letters. Bridge secure. Rule broken. Equation balanced. When I closed the notebook, my hands were black with soot, but steady. The battle was over. The system had failed, and I had fixed it. We returned to headquarters at dusk the next day. The sky was the color of ash, and the snow had turned to slush under the boots of too many passing men. Engines idled everywhere, half-tracks, trucks, wrecks waiting for fuel or mercy. The air smelled of oil and victory, both faint and temporary. Captain Dean Mallory stood outside a canvas command tent, coat unbuttoned, cigarette burning low. He didn't look angry. That was worse. Anger meant noise, silence meant arithmetic. He motioned me inside without a word. The tent was lit by a single bulb that swung slightly in the wind. Maps pinned to plywood showed the same terrain I had fought across, only cleaner, flatter, bloodless. He held a paper in his gloved hands, my after-action report. 3 pages. Coordinates, sh*T sequences, estimated damage. I had left out the parts that couldn't be measured, the fog, the sound of burning men, the way the snow looked orange in the firelight. Mallory read quietly. Then he said, "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." He looked up. His eyes were gray, steady, not cruel. "You fired without confirmation from HQ. You risked exposing your position, jeopardizing," he stopped, as if the rest of the sentence didn't make sense anymore. "And you saved the 84th Division." "Yes, sir." He exhaled, folded the report once, then again. The paper creased sharply. "If I send this to Corps, you'll be commended publicly and punished privately. They'll give you a medal and a court date on the same day." I said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like defense. He looked at the folded report for a long moment, then tore it in half. The sound was small, almost gentle. "Then this never happened," he said. The halves fell into a metal waste bin. The bulb above us flickered. For a moment, we just listened to the wind pushing at the tent walls. Then he added, "You bought us time, Sergeant. That's all this war ever is, time. Don't make me explain to someone why it had to come from you." Outside, I could hear the clatter of typewriters, the shuffle of boots, the low murmur of men whose wars existed on paper. I saluted, turned to leave, but he stopped me. "One more thing," Mallory said. "How did you know which ones to hit?" "Pattern," I answered. "They move like gears. Break one tooth, the rest jam." He nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." I don't know if he did. For the next week, we stayed near Liège, repairing, refitting, waiting. The snow came back, soft this time, like nothing had burned at all. The men who'd crossed the Elsenborn Bridge kept moving west. They never knew they'd almost been trapped. They just saw a road still open and assumed someone somewhere had done their job. Word spread anyway. Rumors always do. The story changed shape every time it was told. Some said a hidden battery of 6 Wolverines ambushed a German armored regiment. Others swore a unit of artillery had turned the forest into a K*Ling field with perfect timing. My name was never mentioned, and that suited everyone. Eddie Cole started it without meaning to. Around campfires he'd talk about the ghost line, one Wolverine that struck like lightning, then vanished into fog. It was easier for men to believe in ghosts than in disobedience. Ghosts didn't break orders. They just appeared when needed and disappeared before the paperwork caught up. A week later, a liaison officer from Corps visited the camp. He carried a clipboard and a camera. "We're compiling field data," he said. "Pattern fire doctrine, they're calling it. Precision engagement by sequential targeting." He asked for any range logs, diagrams, firing notes. I gave him copies from my notebook. He didn't ask why they existed. He just nodded and said, "Good work, Sergeant," like we were talking about irrigation statistics. That was how the war learned to rename sin as innovation. Cole wanted to celebrate. I told him not to. "You can't toast what didn't happen," I said. But that night I heard him laughing with the mechanics, retelling the story. Each time it grew brighter, cleaner. The fog vanished, the smoke thinned, the math turned into magic. By morning, the tale was traveling faster than the mail. When we finally moved out, the bridge still stood, patched but holding. Trucks thundered across day and night. I drove past it once at sunrise, the planks coated in frost, the air still smelling faintly of diesel and cordite. I looked down at the river and thought of the men who had tried to build their own crossing. Their bridge had burned to nothing. Ours endured. A corporal beside me said, "Heard the brass wants to write up whoever pulled that Elsenborn trick." I said, "Good for him." He grinned. "You know who it was?" I kept my eyes on the road. "No," I said. That was the rule now, silence. By the end of February, the snow began to melt. The war moved east, slower but unstoppable. Orders changed hands, units folded and reformed. We kept fighting, because momentum is its own command. But inside me, something had already turned cold and final. I had learned the paradox that keeps every mechanic awake: the better a fix works, the less anyone believes it was needed. Somewhere far behind the front, clerks would file reports about the miraculous defense of the Elsenborn Bridge. They'd draw arrows on clean maps, never knowing how close those arrows came to erasure. History prefers clean paper. It cannot stand the stain of logic over obedience. But on that paper, invisible to all but a few, a line had been drawn, one that said the system could be repaired, even if you had to break it first. The war ended not with trumpets, but with maintenance. Machines had to be drained, catalogued, cleaned, and shipped. Men too. We were all equipment that had outlived its design. I was demobilized in September of 1945, issued a train ticket, a handshake, and a small envelope that said, "Discharge, Honorable." Inside the station at Le Havre, someone played a harmonica off-key. The ship home smelled of rust and hope. Kansas looked smaller when I returned. The fields were flat again, the way I remembered, but the air seemed thinner, like the war had burned part of the oxygen out of the world. Ruth was waiting by the fence. She had the same calm eyes, but her hands trembled when I stepped down from the truck. She didn't ask what I'd seen, I didn't offer. We stood in the dust until it settled, and then she said, "You'll fix the tractors again?" "I'll fix whatever still runs," I told her. We started small. A shed roof repaired, a pump coaxed back to life. Word spread that I could make anything mechanical breathe again, and soon my workshop filled with the engines of other men's lives: threshers, plows, generators, a few wrecked Jeeps sold at auction. I never charged much. The sound of a machine coming back to life was payment enough. Some nights, when the wind hit the siding just right, it sounded like artillery. Ruth would pause by the window, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. The war had taken that reflex, it had replaced fear with calculation. I kept my notebook in the drawer under the counter, the same one I'd used in Belgium. Its pages were smudged, corners stiff with soot. Every so often I'd open it, not to read, but to confirm it still existed. Proof of a decision that had no witnesses. In 1952, a letter arrived. No return address at first glance, just a government seal and the word "declassified" stamped across the top. Inside were photocopied pages, typewritten diagrams of firing arcs, impact charts, sequential targeting data. At the bottom of the final sheet, a label. Pattern Fire Doctrine, Field Example, February 1945, Elsenborn Sector. I stared at the notation for a long time. My handwriting had been retyped, cleaned, measured into official language. Range estimates had become tactical intervals. My crude sketches were redrawn with rulers. The numbers were the same, but the story had been removed. At the bottom of the page, one line stood alone in bold. Effectiveness, proven. That was all. No signature, no thanks, no name. Just a system that had swallowed my sin and filed it under progress. I put the folder back in its envelope and closed the drawer. Ruth found it later while cleaning. "From the army?" she asked. "Just paperwork," I said. She nodded, trusting me, and left it alone. Years passed. The field stayed stubborn, the sky wide and untroubled. Men came back from Korea with the same 1,000-yard look we'd carried home a decade before. Some found work, some didn't. A few stopped by my shop, curious about the old M10 photographs tacked above the bench. I told them it was just a tank I'd worked on once. Nothing more. On Sundays, I drove out to the bridge near the county line. It wasn't Elsenborn, but it had the same rhythm, wood planks, steel girders, water moving underneath with quiet insistence. I'd lean against the rail and listen to the hum of trucks passing, the same frequency as an idling engine. Sometimes I thought about the German engineers who tried to cross their own river that night. Men I never saw clearly, whose craft I understood better than their language. They'd followed their own rules, too. Maybe one of them had a wife who wrote notes, maybe he believed in systems. In another version of history, we might have traded manuals instead of shells. I received one more letter in 1961, this time from a former lieutenant named Mallory. The envelope was thin, the handwriting exact. "I've been lecturing at Fort Knox," he wrote. "They teach your firing pattern now. They don't know it's yours. I thought you should." Below that, a single sentence, "For what it's worth, you were right to pull the trigger." I didn't answer. Some acknowledgments arrived too late to fit anywhere. That night I oiled the hinges of the shop door and watched the sun sink behind the fields. The wind smelled of rain and iron. Machines rested in their stalls like animals, silent, waiting. I thought about that bridge again, how fragile it had looked under the weight of retreating men, and how it had held anyway. Maybe all structures, metal, wooden, human, survive the same way, by bending where they're supposed to break. When the letter yellowed with time, I sealed it with the others in a small box labeled simply Notes. No medals, no citations, just the logic of what had once been forbidden and later renamed doctrine. Sometimes a customer would ask if I'd ever served. I'd say yes, a long time ago. They'd nod respectfully and move on. None ever guessed that the pattern behind their sons' training manuals came from a farm mechanic who decided that the right answer was the wrong order. And so the years went, slow and even. The war drifted into textbooks, the names changed, the W*P*NS modernized, the equations stayed the same. Somewhere, officers quoted data derived from my notebook, never knowing the handwriting beneath the type. When I closed the shop each night, I wiped my hands on a rag, turned off the lights, and listened for the stillness before silence, the same pause between order and action I'd once lived inside. That sound has followed me all my life. It's the sound of a rule breaking clean. He said no to his commander. And saved an army. They called it doctrine later, printed it, taught it, recited it in classrooms as if it had always been truth. They never mentioned the silence before the first *T, or the cold breath that turned to steam on his lips, or the moment the rules lost their weight. History prefers clean names and numbered pages. It does not know the sound a man makes when he chooses logic over law. Caleb Norris never spoke of Elsenborn again. He fixed engines, watched seasons, aged quietly. Somewhere in a file room, his disobedience lives on as geometry and efficiency. Sometimes, on nights when machines sleep and the wind hums through steel, I imagine he still hears that question in the fog. Why say no? Because sometimes history doesn't move by orders. It moves because one man refuses to follow them.